So, welcome to our next lecture on Mesilat Yesharim. We are in the chapter 11, where he discusses the midah, the character trait of Nekiyut, which can be translated as blamelessness, perfection, various other translations in the different translations that we have. And our last conversation, it's hard for me to say what page we're on because we all have different versions. But we just discussed the topic of Nekima and Netira, which is revenge and bearing a grudge, and the biblical prohibition to take revenge, and our requirement to be forgiving. The Just as a reminder, and we're about to start his discussion of Shavuot, which is oaths, taking oaths. Which we'll discuss in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to remind you the point of Nekiyut, the midah of Nekiyut, however you translate it, whatever English word you use. The point is that it's not enough to just fulfill the basic requirements of any mitzvah, of any commandment the Torah gives us. But what we're required to do is do it right, is to do it properly, is to do it to its to look into the details. It's not enough just to do the basics, and that's the point of the midah, of the trait of Nekiyut. So and now we're in the issue of Shavuot. It's interesting for a lot of reasons. Shavuot refers to oaths, taking an oath, and the Torah in several places refers to the law of taking God's name in vain, because an oath typically means that a person usually takes an oath by saying, in the name of God, then he or she makes a statement in order to emphasize that this is an oath, that he's really or she's really swearing that this is the truth. And it would be a great sin to take God's name in vain. Now, even if one doesn't mention the name of God and one takes a shavua, a oath that's untrue, it's considered a violation of the same principle. So this is actually almost an ideal topic, because he says, Ulam HaShavuot, when it comes to the question of Shavuot, of taking oaths, in general, it's usually only very vulgar, rough people are going to, anyone who's not just a really rough, vulgar person, would actually go ahead and swear and take God's name in vain, and actually openly make fun of, or it's let it even roll off our tongue, make fun of God or something like that. That's only a very vulgar, uncivilized person. But anyone who's not one of those is going to be nishmar, is going to be careful, mehotzi shem shamayim piv levatala, to actually say God's name for no reason. Most of us are careful when we refer to God to not say God's name in a vain and disrespectful way. But however, kol shekain b'shvua, certainly there aren't many people who are going to use God's name while making an oath or swearing. I see there's already a hand up, so Yosef, go ahead.
Well, because on the one hand, I agree, on the other hand, I don't. My friend Pastor Terry, he taught his community for 14 years to never say "Oh my God," because he said that when they're saying that, they're not really meaning that they're afraid of God or anything. They're just. He said that they're saying it in vain, and they don't even recognize that it's actually in a very ridiculous way. Like, anyway, and he's not saying that's what we're talking about. But I think that was, sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Nowadays it's probably be more easy to find people that would say God's name in vain than in the days of the Ramchal. But still, someone to openly blaspheme God, it's just whatever. I mean, yeah, there are people that would do it today, especially. But For the most of us are not worried about openly violating that. However, when it comes to the issue of making statements which we declarative statements about the truth of something that we're about to state, right? There's a lot of smaller branches of this issue where we declare things to be true with certitude and make such statements, which are also part and parcel of this same prohibition, even if we don't actually take God's name in vain. Maybe it's true that they aren't the most severe because we're not actually saying something, using God in a blasphemous way, but rather if you want to fulfill this midah, this character trait, which we're trying to teach and inculcate with this in this entire chapter, you should be careful from them. And then he gives an example, because it says in the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar, this is says Rabbi Elazar, lav shvua ve'hein shvua. When a person says no, right, it's an oath, and if a person says yes, it's an oath. Amar Rava, and Rava explains, what does this mean? V'huda Amar lav trei zimni. When a person makes a strong statement, it doesn't mean anytime we say the word no, that's considered an oath, or anytime we say yes, it means a person says no, or yes, right? Budamar hein trei zimni, right? V'chein amru, and similar where they said v'hin tzedek, right? A person has to have a righteous, a proper measurement. And the Gemara explains and says, "Hey, lav shalchat tzedek." When you say yes, it should be righteous. It should be true. It should really mean it. V'hein shalchat tzedek, and same thing. And when you say no, it should be true. It should be correct. So basically, what he's saying is something that is, I think, a lot more relevant than we first realized when we read this. People often will make emphatic statements in order to emphasize, so that so that people should believe what they're saying, and if they're not blaspheming God, I mean, it seems very distant from that. But when we get up there and act as if we know what we're talking about, and we know we're lying, and we emphasize something this way, and this, unfortunately, today is extremely common. We could just open up whatever your favorite or least favorite social media tool may be, and people are getting up, making all kinds of statements and talking as if they know what they're talking about. And that is, the Ramchal is telling us, that is really part of, when a person deliberately makes a false statement but says it in an emphatic way as if it's true, that is enough. That is a branch of this issue. When a person says that, speaks that way, and that's something we have to be very careful of. If you're not sure about something, then you're not sure about it. Just admit the fact that you don't know. Or if you're saying something and could be true, then be honest about it. Don't just try to say something in an emphatic way just in order that people should think that you know what you're talking about. And of course, then he continues that the corollary of this, is of course, V'nei dvar sheker, the issue of saying things that are false, is gamhu choli ra, is a very severe disease or sickness. Nispashet ma'od b'vnei adam, it is extremely widespread among people. V'ulam madregas yeshbo. There's a lot of different types of people that say falsehoods. There's a lot of different kinds of liars out there, some of which most of us, at least I should hope, are not guilty of. So he's going to start with the most severe, which doesn't describe most of us, at least most of us here, but I'm sure some of us can think of people that are like this, right? But yesh b'nei adam she'umanusam mamash tu ashakmanis, that their occupation is to be a liar. I mean, that is what they do for a living. That is all they do all day, is they lie, right? These are kinds of people who literally make up in their own mind complete and utter falsehoods, Leman harbo sicha ben habrios, in order that they should be respected in conversations with people. They're just constantly lying because they want everybody to think that they know everything. So people should think, oh, he knows everything, and literally constantly making things up in conversation, constantly inventing stories that never happened, and constantly lying. Valam Nemar, about such people, it says, to Avas Hashem Sifsei Shaker, it is the lips that speak falsehood is an abomination to God. V'yomer Sifsosechem Dibru Sheker Lishonchem Avla Tega. This is from the Isaiah. Your lips are speaking falsehood, and your tongues are just muttering or babbling with constant wickedness. The rabbis, may their memory be blessed, already said what the fate of such people are when it said Arba Kitos Einam Mekabos V'Nashchina. There's 4 groups of people who never ever will greet the God. Just give me one second. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry about that. So V'achas mehem kat shakranim, and the people that are just liars are one of them. So the wait, hold on 1 minute. Give me 1 minute.
That's okay. So we know you're a doctor. So
yeah, you got patient and labor.
Please
You're forgiven.
tend to your patient.
All right, we're good. We're back online. Sorry about that. So
okay.
And also my cat needed to get in on the
that's important as well.
Okay, so that's one class. But there's a similar group. They might not be quite the same, but these are the people who, when they tell stories, make up details, and they just make up lies. This isn't their entire occupation. To go around and constantly make up stories that have never happened. When they're coming to tell some story, something, they mix in details that are lies, lies that just come up in their minds. Right? And they get so accustomed to doing this that it becomes part of their nature. These are the kinds of people that lie, that you can't ever believe them. Because even if a story they tell might be somewhat true, they're constantly making up details and inventing things. What is the punishment of a person who is a liar? Such a person, it's like, the boy who cried wolf. Even when he finally is telling you the truth, nobody listens to him, because everybody knows he's always making things up. Because it's such an ingrained part of their nature, this evil trait, right? That it's almost impossible that they could say something without some lie in it. Right? They have taught their tongue to speak lies, and they exhaust themselves by committing sins. So those are 2 classes of people, and we can all, I'm sure, think of such people. We all know such people, whether we know them in person, come across them in the public sphere, and so on. So v'yesh od acherim, but then there are others, shechol yom kal mechol rishonim, that their disease is not quite as bad. It's a little bit lighter than the disease of the first 2 classes of people that we mentioned. V'heim osam she'enam kruam kol kach b'sheker. They're not constantly telling lies as much as the others. Ela shelo yachushu lisrachek mimenu. They're just not being careful to stay away from lies. Right? V'im yizdamin lahem yomru. And if the opportunity comes up where they can slip in a lie and think they can get away with it, right, they'll do it. Upamim rabos yom. Sometimes they'll say it, somewhat like a little bit jokingly, a little bit wink, wink. And often it's not even necessarily with an evil intent. They just don't take it seriously, right? So they'll throw in a little bit of lie here and there. However, the wisest of men taught us this is all the opposite of what God wants from us. This is the opposite of the traits that those that are pious should have. Humasha Amar, where it says Dvar Sheker Yisna Tzadik, a righteous person hates things that are false. When the Torah says stay far away from falsehood. So don't think that every once in a while, for this situation, I could just make a little lie and that'll be okay. V'tira shelo Amar misheker tishamer. It doesn't say be careful from lying. It says tirchak v'tvar sheker tirchak. Stay far away from it. L'hayir osanu, to remind us, to awaken us to the fact how far we have to run away from this trait of saying things that are false. The remnant of Israel will not do bad things. They will not speak falsehood. There won't even be found any trickery in their words. The seal of God is truth. If that is what God uses as his signature, so to speak, when God signs off on something, he signs off emes, truth, right? God is essentially saying that God is truth, right? If that's what God chooses to be his signature, can you imagine how much the opposite of truth is disgusting before God? And God warned us so many times how important speaking the truth is, as it says in Zechariah, Dabru emes Israel, each person should speak truthfully to his friend. God established his throne with kindness, and he sits upon his throne with truth. Right? God says, my nation are the sons who will not say falsehood. It is one is dependent upon the other. If you want to be one of God's children, then you have to be one of the truth tellers. That in the future Jerusalem will be called the city of the truth tellers, which is saying those that are going to be a part of the full redemption are the ones that stick to truth, in order to tell us how important it is. So there's so many references to the importance of truth, and the truth is pun intended, that we have to look into ourselves and remember, we do all fall into lies. We do fall, and we're not necessarily bad people. We're not necessarily, but we resort to untruths, and especially in the public sphere today. I mean, we see in front, how many people try to accomplish and achieve things by twisting stories, by misreporting things, by misrepresenting things, just in order to gain whatever it is that they're trying to gain. And this is a very, very bad thing. And such people are not among the people that will ever greet the face of God, so to speak. One should speak truth within his heart. Kagon Rav Safra. The example is Rav Safra, and we'll explain what that means in a second. In order to teach you just how far the obligation to speak truth reaches. We mentioned that there's with very few exceptions, right? We are not allowed to ever lie. There are a few small exceptions where it can be done, like for the sake of making peace between one person and another. Occasionally there are instances where lying might be okay and appropriate, but in general there's very few exceptions. And truth is one of the pillars upon which the world stands. A person who speaks falsehood is pulling away the foundations upon what the earth stands. And we know this destruction always follows from leaders who lead the people with lies, who lead the people with untruths. Such people cause destruction. And this is something, it's not a supernatural thing. It's something we all know from our experience if you watch what happens in this world. The opposite, of course, Misha Zohir Ba'amas, someone who is careful to stick with the truth. He is keeping up the foundations that the world rests upon. There was a story in the Gemara, which the story goes as follows. He doesn't quote the whole story, but there was a certain mythical place where everyone always told the truth. They never ever lied, and in that place there was no death. Nobody ever died. And the story goes that the Malach HaMavos was that there was never possible to be any death in this place. And then the story goes that somebody went there and he knocked on someone's door, and the person that his wife was bathing at the time, and the person knocks on the door and asks, "Where's your wife?" And he didn't want to answer straight because he didn't feel that would be appropriate, modest to say where she was doing. So he lied and he said she's not home, right? And right away there was a lie, and the Ramchal kind of misquotes this a little bit. He says Lefisha Ishto shel Rabbi Ploni Shinsa b'Devara, because the wife changed her words, but when you look at the actual story, it was the man that changed his words. Regardless, the point is the same. So Afal Pisha Haya Kavana Tova, his intent on the lie was good, right? You'd think that such a story was a good one. His intention was good. But still, nonetheless, because of the lie, now all of a sudden he introduced lying into this mythical town. Gerta Gerat Bahem Malach HaMavos Ad She Gershua Misham. Now all of a sudden people started to die, and they threw her out. They threw him out. And once they threw out the liars, they were able to go back to their place without death. Now, what you learn from this story is, so what should that person have done? So Gemara, I can't remember. I think we had it recently in Daf Yomi. I think it's early in Zvachim, but I might be wrong. Regardless, the story is that sometimes you don't necessarily have to always tell the truth, and you don't have to always say everything. You can answer all kinds of things. You could say, I'd rather not tell you, or you can say, it's none of your business. Or you can say, there's a lot of ways to answer without lying, and so because when you make up a lie, you're almost training yourself that it's okay to make up a story. If certain things, it's better to plead the fifth than to lie. It's better to there's ways to not, if in this particular case where it would have been inappropriate to say what she was doing at the time, that's understandable. But there's other ways to get out of it without saying it, without actually lying. And that's really the lesson of the story that we should think about. Sometimes, a person asks you a question and you don't really want to give him the answer, and you may have a very good reason to not give him the answer. So don't answer, there's but to make something up, you're already opening up all kinds of pathways. You don't know where that lie is going to lead, what he's going to do with the information that you gave him that isn't true. And once you lie, then you have to lie to cover up the lie, and then you have to lie to cover up the cover-up of the lie, and then it all spirals into all kinds of nonsense. It's much better just to say, you know what, none of your business. Leave me alone, and then finish. You didn't lie, you didn't say anything, and you're done, right? I don't need to go into this in such length. It makes sense. It's something that anyone with a brain understands how important it is, and logic dictates that this should be that forces us to realize that in a society that's based on lies, it's going to end up in a big mess. The relevance of this to our time should be pretty obvious to anyone that's ever opened up any news source. whether it was one that tries to be true or not. Either we know, it's something that we should all know, and lies are something that we should never ever tolerate, especially from our leaders. So okay, so we talked about Shavuot oaths, right? And we talked about the importance of sticking with the truth. And the bottom line of all of this is again the point that outright blatant total liars, most of us aren't, but most of us do get caught up in situations which we probably could have done in a more truthful way. And that's what Nekiyut is all about. Not just not blatantly lying, but being really careful that we stick with the truth. So now the next subject that he's going to talk about is also very relevant. And this is the issue of Chilul Hashem. Literally, it means profaning or the name, meaning the name of God. And it generally refers to a situation, and it's a situation that he's going to be discussing in a minute, is, when people look at us as representative of those who believe in or worship or profess to be God-fearing people. And specifically, if we look at ourselves as Jews, because people look at Jews and they expect us to act in a certain way, in ways that, there's a microscope or looking at us, right? And if we don't act right, people will say, it reflects badly on God, and it reflects badly on our people. People expect us to act in a certain way, and when we don't, it's a chilul Hashem. It profanes God's name, and people then will reject God. They will reject everything that we stand for, or at least claim that we stand for. So the branches of chilul Hashem, gam kein hem rabim ugedolim. There are also many branches of this one. Right, so ki harbe tzarich adam lios chasal kvod kono. A person should always be concerned about the honor of his creator, right, of his maker. V'chol ma sheyase tzarich sheyase, everything that we do tzarich sheyistakel, we need to look at it b'yisbonin ma'od and think very carefully. Shelo yetze misham ma sheyuchal lios chilul lechod shamayim, something that could turn out to be a profanation, to profaning the honor of heaven. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. Ukvar shaninu, right? We've already learned. Echad shogig v'echad mezid b'chol Hashem. It's not always intentional. Sometimes we could do something completely unintentionally wrong, right? And it ends up being, it profanes God's name. Somebody looks at it and they think, they say bad things about, Jewish people and as representative of God, and it causes a profanation of God's name. So we have to be very, very careful, because we can unintentionally cause such things to happen. And the examples here are very, very poignant examples, especially the first one, but you'll see in a second. The Gemara says, well, give me an example. What's an example of profaning God's name? Omar Rav. So Rav says, Rav is one of the greatest of the rabbis of the Talmud. He says, a person like me, presumably if Rav were to walk into a store, everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows what he represents, right? If I were to go into a butcher shop and buy a piece of meat, and not pay right away, right? Now, especially in those days, but, even today, you can, well, not that much today, but I remember as a kid, going to the kosher supermarket, and he had a little book there, and he would write it down, and my parents would come every once in a while and pay off the bill, and he would look in his book. But a person like Rav says, for me, that's not acceptable, because anyone could look, even if I intend to pay later, and even if it's okay with the butcher, someone will look and say, oh, look at that guy, he's going to get away without paying, he's not paying right away. So a small thing which technically might not be anything wrong with it, but if you're the kind of person that people look at, you have to be perfect. You have to be better than that. And of course, we all know, when somebody does something wrong, it's bad. But when a rabbi or a person who's a respected person in the community does something wrong, it's so much worse, and it causes a tremendous amount of backlash against religious people in general. Rabbi Yochanan says a different example. No, like a person like me, below Torah below tefillin. If I were to walk around without studying and not studying Torah and not wearing my tefillin, so people expect of me a certain level of behavior, and if I were to go around and act in a certain way, then that would be a chilul Hashem. And we all need to think of ourselves as representatives of that. We all know what happens when, if you don't mind, I'll tell a story. It's a combination of stories, 3 stories that happened to me in one day that really drove home this point to me about how I was a representative of the entire Jewish people, just me. So this is in 2006, I think. So it was during the Iraq War. I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to work in the hospital there, as part of the war effort. So I was just sent to Kentucky. Fine. So I'm in Kentucky, and when I get there, the housing on base was all full. So the Army gave me a voucher. I can find a house outside the base, or a room or whatever, and rent it with this voucher. But I had to go look for one. The internet wasn't really a big thing. There was an internet, but you couldn't get online and look for apartments. So I had to do it the old-fashioned way. I got a paper with the classifieds, houses for rent in the area, and I had a price that I could do. Fine. So I go and I start looking for a house. So the first place I found, I called the guy, I called the number, and I asked him if I could come see the house. So he says to me, and I can't imitate it well, but in a very heavy, country accent, he says to me, it's hard to explain how to get there. And remember, this was before GPS. So, but meet me in the parking lot of McDonald's and I'll drive you there. So, okay, fine. So I go and I meet, and it was obvious that I was Jewish. I don't remember if I was wearing a kippah or not, and he starts asking me, he says, I hope you don't mind if I ask you, but, I say, what do you mean? Of course, just go ahead. He says, are you Jewish? And I say, yeah. And he says, well, I love to read about Jews, but my friends, all they know about Jews is that Jewish women talk a lot. All right. That's all he knows about Jews. And I'm thinking, because he says, that's what they see on television, right? All they see on TV is it's pretty, if we think about it, all of all these comedy shows with Jews writing, and they're making fun of Jews, but half the audience that's watching doesn't know anything about Jews, right? So when you make fun, all they know is that Jewish women talk a lot. All right, that's what he knows. But at the end of the day, I looked at the house; it wasn't the right thing for me. And as we're going back, I remember him telling me, when you go back to Maryland to all your Jewish friends, make sure you tell them that you met a real live hillbilly. So I said, okay, great. So that was the first story. So here I am thinking about Hollywood and its depiction of Jews, and how so many people in the world, that's their only exposure, right? So they look at the TV and they think that Jewish women talk a lot. All right. The next thing that happens in the same day is I find a place that was good. It was close to the base, and the house was in decent condition, and it was in the right price range. So I go around, I see the place, and I tell the guy who's showing it to me, I want to rent this place. So he says, fine, come meet me in my office, and we'll fill out the paperwork. So I go and sit with them in the office, and we go through the paperwork. I sign the papers, I give him a deposit, and then afterwards, he starts turning red and purple and pink, and he says, I hope you don't mind. I don't really want to insult you. Is it okay if I ask you something? And I'm already know where he's going. So I kind of let him get himself embarrassed, because I thought whatever. And he goes through this whole thing, and I say, go ahead. What is it? What's the big deal? I said, I'm an adult. He says, are you? And he couldn't even get the word out. Are you Jewish? And then I'm looking, and then I'd kind of smile. I said, yeah, what's the big deal? Why was that such a hard question to ask? He says, well, because, a lot of people around here, what they think about Jews. And the way he said it was like he was asking me if I was a pig. He was asking me if I was some kind of a devil or something, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy I don't know exactly where he got it from, but this is what I'm imagining in my head. He's probably goes to some church where there's an anti-Semitic preacher. And his entire life since he's a kid, he's been listening to Jews are the devil and they're Satan worshipers and they're just all kinds of not so wonderful things about Jews. So in his mind, it's an insult. Okay. But then so now I have two impressions. Then later in the day, I rented some furniture like a bed and a dresser or whatever. And a guy comes and delivers my stuff, and then he leaves the house. And then after he leaves, I hear him pulling up again in the truck. So I thought, well, maybe he forgets something. He knocks on my door and he says, is it okay if I ask you something? This is all that happens on the same day, which made it even more remarkable. It's okay if I ask you something? I said, sure. And I knew what I already was. He says, are you Jewish? By this time, I remember it was around Hanukkah time. So I had a menorah already up by my thing. So it was pretty obvious that I was Jewish. So he says to me, I just lost my girlfriend and I just broke up, and he's like his tears in his eyes, and I'm really upset about it, and we were together for a long time, and I wasn't nice to her, but I really wanted to make up, and I really wanted it to work out, and he asked me, so I say, okay, I'm sorry, if you like, so what can I help you? He says, is it okay to pray that my girlfriend comes back to me? So, well, what I answered him, but in case you're curious, was basically I said, no, you can't pray, but that someone else should make a decision, right? You can pray to God and ask for guidance, right? That you should learn how to approach her, how to make up, what you can do to improve yourself. But for her decision is her decision. What she decides to do, that's for her to make. You can't pray. That was my answer. I don't know whether it was a good answer or not. I don't know. But you can see in this guy that in his mind, a Jew was a spiritual person, right? A person who has wisdom, and he found a Jew, right? And so he felt that he can ask me a question that he didn't know me for nothing. The only interaction we had was, delivering some stuff to my house. And by the end of the day, I'm just thinking to myself, after these three things, how remarkable this is. Because in all three situations, you have a person who never saw a Jew in his life, right? Or if they did, they didn't know it, right? Or never really encountered a Jew that they can talk to. And one of them, his entire impression of Jews comes from Hollywood, and from stupid jokes from stupid comedians that don't realize that that's the only exposure that people watching these TV shows know about Jews, right? It's all well and good if you or I make jokes about our mother and being a yenta or something, which is also not appropriate. But we can make jokes about it because we know we love our mother and we know that she has a lot of wonderful qualities. So every once in a while, we might slip and make a silly joke. All right, fine. But when that's the only exposure that the person ever has, that's all they know, right? And the same thing with this other guy. I don't know what kind of things he was exposed to about Jews, but they clearly weren't positive, right? So that's all he knows. He never met a Jew who treated him nicely, who helped him with something. And then the other guy was exposed to a Jew being a wise person, a spiritual person, a person. And if we think about this every single day when we are out in the world functioning, we have no idea if the guy we're talking to or the woman we're talking to, this might be his or her only real exposure to a Jewish person, And when they go home, right, and when they go back to wherever it is that they live or the people that they're with, the story that whenever the topic of Jews comes up, they're going to remember, yeah, I once met a Jew and blah, 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 blah. And how do you want the end of that sentence to be? Do you want the end of that sentence to be, he was a nice guy, he gave me a good tip, he helped me out, he changed my tire? Or do you want that to be, he lied to me, he wasn't nice to me, he didn't care that I was struggling, he refused to help me, or he wheeled and dealed and tried to get, what kind What do you want the end of that sentence to be? And that's what Ramchal is saying over here. That's what Chilul Hashem is about. And that's exactly what we're talking about. And I'm going to continue reading now. Via Inyan, Shekol Adam lefi madregaso, every person according to his level, lefi mashu nechshav be'ein yadar, and the way he is looked at by other people, the way the people around you look. And we as Jews, we're constantly being looked at, right? He always has to think levilti asos davar. Bilti Hagan Lish Kamoso, not to do something that wouldn't be appropriate for a person like him. Maybe what you're doing is okay for other people. Maybe what you're doing is considered okay for other people out there, but it's not okay for a person like you that's in your position. And I tell you that you don't have to be a rabbi, a community leader, or a person with a long beard. It doesn't matter. We're all Jews, and we're all being looked at, right? As great as you may be, and as high, as lofty as your position is, and that all the more so you have to be more careful in matters of service, and care and concern with those issues. If you don't do this, then God's name, the name of heaven, will be profaned because of you. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. Excuse me. Ki kvod haTorah, it is the honor to the Torah, and this is for anyone who represents the Torah. Shemishemar b'halimud ba, the more you study Torah, and unfortunate for all you guys, you are now studying Torah, so we're all in this group, right? So the more you study Torah, Yarbek Kamokain, the more so you should be Yosher, in being appropriate, proper, and upright, Uvatikun Amidos, and have proper character traits. And as much for a person who studies a lot, the more you're missing, people see, why should I study Torah? The guy who studies Torah, look at him, look what he's doing, right? Why should I bother, studying Torah if look at that guy and look what kind of a bad person he is. This is a profanation of his great name. He gave us his holy Torah, and he commanded us to engage in it. The purpose of him giving the Torah was for us to achieve completion and to be good people. That's why he gave us the Torah. And if you represent Torah and you study Torah and you're something other than a good person, how much more so do you ruin that name? I think we have time for one more topic, and that's the inyan of Shabbos, of Shabbat, right? And we're going to find when he talks about Shabbat, I think you're going to find this. I found this to be extremely interesting, because and I'll give you a little introduction. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it'll help you understand why I think it's so remarkable what he says. Because think about Shabbat for a minute, right? And he's going to mention there's tons and tons of laws. If you want to keep Shabbos appropriately, right? There's lots and lots of things that you have to do. Make kiddush and go to shul and listen to the Torah and all kinds of wonderful things that we do on Shabbos. And there's also lots and lots of rules about what we're not allowed to do on Shabbos, right? And a lot of people that we know, if we think they're pious, they make sure I'm not going to drive my car. I'm not going to use my phone. I'm not going to turn on lights. I'm not even going to do this. I'm not going to do that. All these things you're not going to do. And there's tons and tons of laws, thousands and thousands of laws. If you want to spend a lifetime studying it, you have plenty to study, right? But think about and I'm not going to give it away until we read it, but think about for a moment, what's if you were going to pick the most important thing about Shabbos, which is probably the least kept thing about Shabbos, right? It's the most important thing in terms of the spirit of Shabbos, but it's the thing which people are least careful in keeping. And it's not even technically one of the most important laws on the hierarchy if you learn through the Shulchan Aruch. It's there, but it's not the highest on the list, right? And that's what he's going to harp on here. Right? It's something which which we're all guilty of. And it's something, and it's also, in a sense, one of the easiest parts of Shabbos to keep, technically. So, Vihine, and if I made you curious, good, because that was the point. Vihine, right? Behold, Gam Shmiras HaShabbosos V'Yomim Tovim, keeping the laws of Shabbos and the holidays. Rabbi, it's a great, big subject. Ki HaMishpatim Rabbim, there's lots of laws. V'cheim Amru Hilchasa Rabbasi L'Shabbos, there's many laws relating to the Shabbos. V'afilu Divrei HaShvus, even rabbinic laws, so there's the basic Torah laws and there's rabbinic laws. Even the rabbinic laws, even though they're just rabbinic in origin, they're still very important. As like they said, that something which is only a rabbinic law, don't take it lightly. Because there's an example of smicha, which is a part of the process of bringing a carbon, bringing a sacrifice. We lean on when we say admit our sins, say vidoy. And lean on the animal, that's just a rabbinic enactment, but still they still all kinds of debates about that. So it just shows how important even rabbinic things are. If you really want to know all of the details of all of the laws, there's plenty. They're all laid out in among the rabbinic decisors and the law books. You can go and look it up and read for all kinds of details and laws. And they're all important. We're obligated in all of them, and the necessary care and concern needs to be placed on them. However, what is the hardest thing for people to do? But that which is the hardest thing of keeping Shabbos is hashvisa min ha'esek u'midaber b'masam u'matanam, is not being involved and stop and not talking about your business, right? Not talking about the weekday things of the state of the stock market or the state of your job, of your work, of staying away from of those things. The point of Shabbos, right, is for us to carve out a space and time for us to be with God, to be with our family, to be with our communities, right? It is if your brain and your mind is going to be in the weekday, and that's what you're going to be talking about with your friends, and that's what you're going to be schmoozing about, and that's what you're going to be thinking about, and that's what you're going to be planning about, then you're not keeping Shabbos, right? And that's the hardest thing for people to do. I see, Jeff, your hand is up, but I'm going to.
I wanted to interrupt there because
Yes.
I would have guessed this actually. My question is, does it also apply to thinking about your business? Like, I'm a lawyer and I've always found it difficult. And I said to myself, well, maybe it only applies if you're discussing it with somebody else. But if you're thinking about it, maybe there's a little more laxity there.
Well,
While I had the occasion, I wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah, the law is you're allowed to think about these things, and you're not allowed to talk or plan or do. But thinking about it is certainly frowned upon. But the easiest way to not think about it is to start by not talking about it.
Oh, that's how you can start. But I found it. But I'm glad to know that it's frowned upon, but not technically.
Yeah, but we'll see. And what's fascinating about this is he chooses this topic, and he says, when this particular prohibition, the prohibition of talking about and being involved in business matters on Shabbos, right, it is mavor b'divrei hanavi, are the things that are mentioned the most in the words of the Nevi'im. The words of the Nevi'im, they don't talk so much. The words of the prophets, even the Torah itself, doesn't spend that much time talking about you're not allowed to light a fire, you're not allowed to plow, you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to this, you're not allowed to that, you're not allowed to write. All those laws are true and they're there, but that when the Yeshayahu wants to talk about Shabbos, when Isaiah talks about Shabbos, what does he harp on? He says, he talks about pursuing your the things that you pursue during the week and speaking about those things, right? I'm sorry, I skipped the line. Right? And you should honor the Shabbos by not doing your usual things and not involving yourself in your usual stuff, right? The spirit of Shabbos, right, is to not be in the same mindset that you're in during the week, right? And not be involved in the same stuff that you're involved in during the week. That's the point, right? And that's the hardest thing. And you can go to any kiddush, right, and listen to the conversations next to you, right? What are people talking about, right? And this is the most important thing. And this is the thing that nobody's keeping. They're in shul, right? Right? They're not, maybe they drove, maybe they didn't drive, whatever. But right at this moment, they're not driving their car, right? They're in shul. They're all together. They listen to the rabbi's sermon, right? And what are they doing? What are they talking about? Fill in the blank. You know what they're talking about, right? And this is the problem of aklalhu. And the rule is shekol mash aser b'Shabbos la'asoso, the things that on Shabbos that we're not supposed to be doing, right? Aser lishtadel bavur laskir b'fiv. You're not supposed. Not only you're not supposed to be doing them, you're not supposed to be making effort in that matter, which would mean like planning for, right? It's one thing if you're thinking about something that happened at work. It's another thing if you tell a story about something that happened at work as part of, a nice conversation, something like that. That's different. But to be sitting there and planning, how am I going to, if you're a lawyer, planning on, how am I going to deal with this case and trying to think of different strategies and what you're going to write, what you're going to argue, that's inappropriate. And speaking, or even to mention it with your mouth. You're not supposed to be looking around your house and thinking, you're not supposed to go shopping today, but I'm going to walk around my house and see, well, what do I need to fix? Right? I'm not going to fix it today, but what am I going to do tomorrow? Right? I need that pipe needs to be replaced. I need to buy a few light bulbs over there. I need to, that's not what Shabbos is for, right? Pesach Hamadina, or the example of a person, he wants to go to the bathhouse to bathe, which he's not supposed to be going to the bathhouse on Shabbos, but instead he's going to walk to the edge of town outside the door. So the minute Shabbos is over, he can run in, right? I'll be the first one online, right? Let's say so that immediately I can be the first guy there, right? That's wrong. If you're not supposed to do it on Shabbos, you're not supposed to be dealing with it on Shabbos, right? So you won't be the first guy. You'll be the middle guy. What's the difference, right? The main thing is that's what Shabbos is for. And therefore the Chachamim said, right? Remember, he said it's important, even though this isn't even one of the main Torah laws. This is a rabbinic law to say this is what I'm going to do tomorrow, right? Tomorrow I'm going to do X, Y, Z, right? Oh, tomorrow I heard there's a big deal by this store. I can go buy tomorrow the merchant is coming with all the supplies that I need. I'm going to make a big purchase, right? Any such similar things. So that's his discussion of Shabbos. And it's interesting, like of all the rules and of all the things, this is what Ramchal chose to emphasize. But he chose it because it's what the Nevi'im emphasize. It's what the prophets emphasize. When Yeshayahu and Isaiah decided to tell us about Shabbos, he didn't tell us about exactly, how much you have to, if you take the pot of the cholent off the fire, if you can put it back on the fire. That's not what he talked about. Not that that's not important, but that's not the main thing about Shabbos. The main thing is for us to be in the right mindset and not be in the same mindset as the weekday. And that's what it's really, really about. And that's Nekiyut. Right, that's what the meat of Nekiyut is. It's not just to technically keep Shabbos by keeping the laws, but it's to remember what the whole point is. Right, if you can keep all the laws, but you're going to be involved all day and schmoozing with your friends about the next deal for next week, then you're not keeping Shabbos the way you're supposed to. I think, this is we're reaching almost the end of the hour. I did warn you that it's going to be a while till we finish this chapter, which is by far the longest one in Mesilat Yesharim. I think we have probably another 3 weeks the rate I'm going, maybe even 4. But that's okay. It's all good. We have a couple minutes open for comments, questions, observations. So I'll open the floor. Remember, we talked about importance of truth. We talked about Chilul Hashem, right? Of remembering who we represent and how to make, not to make a bad impression because it reflects on it reflects on God. It reflects on all of us. And then we talked about the main point of Shabbos. of Shabbat, Shabbos, Sabbath, whatever you want to call it. Same deal. Anyone? If there isn't, that's fine.
Well, I have a question.
All right.
And since we have two rabbis on the screen,
Okay.
this idea that the higher you are in the hierarchy, the closer people expect you to be, quote, perfect, however it's defined. Is that a very heavy burden? I mean, for example, when I walk in a room or I talk, nobody expects anything of a lawyer, especially a retired lawyer. But for you guys, the two of you, people have high expectation of you. And how is it to live with that kind of expectation on your conduct, what you say? Is it a heavy burden? I just am interested because I have the time and I've always wanted to ask rabbis that question.
I'll let Yosef go ahead.
I'll say it not for the recording because I was
After
thinking
I turn
about
off-
the whole time that we were talking, and especially a few examples of real Chilul Hashem that I'm even embarrassed to even think about. But you stopped the record? No, you didn't. So let me
No,
see
I didn't. No.
afterwards. So, or
All right.
afterward, or Jeff, I'll write you an email and I'll copy Rabbi Dr. Shul.
Okay.
No, it's but yes, it's like people tell me now, 16 years later, that I have to be beyond reproach, and that's or whatever it's called, beyond.
That's what sounds right. Beyond reproach.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So but until about 2 years ago, the relationship was such that if something happened, we would talk about it immediately. 2 years ago, we had a vice president who was voted to be vice president because nobody else wanted to be, and I don't know why a board even needs a vice president. Supposedly, it's in case the president isn't there. But while she was vice president, she did all kinds of things that hurt the community, and nobody saw it the way I did, and she was not approachable. So I told other people like why I thought that this was wrong, and I'll just give one example, and I'm not embarrassed, just that it came out completely wrong. The pro-Palestinian group that we have here, none of them are actually Palestinians, but they were asked by the Pride Parade to be the grand marshals and to lead the parade basically. And so even though it sounds really, really dumb because Muslims are mostly against gay people, somehow they got the request, and then our vice president sent an email with a petition that she herself wrote, asking us to demand from the Pride Parade to cancel their participation. And so she used the shul email instead of her own, and so some of the people in the community voted, for the petition because they got it from the shul email, so they didn't think anything of it. They didn't even read it. But when I complained to the president about it, she said, well, we're trying to be inclusive, not divisive. Well, guess what? By saying that the Palestinians can't participate, you are being divisive. And so, and then the parade was canceled, supposedly because of other reasons, and then it was reenacted, whatever. But the reporter who interviewed the vice president asked her, "What do you think about the accusation that the Pride Parade was canceled because of your petition?" 900 people signed it, but there's 5,000 people who usually support this parade. So anyway, she said, "I don't know what to answer, but so be it." Like she really representing our community said, we did it, but that's wrong. Like, stay out of it, or don't stay out of it, but don't use the shul email and the shul name to cause that kind of grief. And so anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. That's yeah, when you
anyway, recently she resigned just after Rosh Hashanah, and so we have somebody much smarter now.
well, the point there is, as we all are, she was officially representing an organization, a
Yeah,
community.
but she expected
Right.
me to be silent about my opinions, and not to get in her way of achieving what she wanted to achieve, because I basically went to the president and said, this is actually going to cause us harm. There's 5,000 people that support it, 900 people who don't. Of the 900 people, there's people who didn't even read the email. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so for the
Thank
last
you.
2 years, I have been struggling a lot with what is expected of me and and how to do it or not do it. Shevel Tasadif, right?
And I'm not a congregational rabbi. I have no official position. I do carry the title, because I earned it through my smicha, but still, we all need to look at it, and when you mentioned about a lawyer, it's not true. I mean, yeah, people make fun of the fact, a lawyer, he'll do or say anything, but that's just, joking around. The bottom line is that you do have standards, right? And there should be standards. There are standards. How many people keep them is a different story, but that's exactly the point. You have standards to uphold, and when people make fun of lawyers, it's because there are too many prominent lawyers that don't uphold those standards. And that's a problem, and we all have. I think every single one of us has that in whatever position that we're in.
Well, and I have to add, because I was a lawyer for 50 years, but I was
Right.
also for 12 years a volunteer chaplain at a assisted living facility.
Hmm.
And it was that experience where I felt I had a higher standard. Just when I walked
Hmm.
in, people looked at me, I felt differently
Right.
the role as a chaplain.
Yeah.
So that was sort of close. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you guys.
Any other comments? I'll turn off the recording, and Rich, in 2 weeks, I guess, will be our next one. I suppose that's January 6th, I guess.
Why
So
is it why is it on 7:30 as opposed to 8? I'm just curious. Is
I
that
don't
better for
remember
you?
exactly why, but when I do it in person, that is a little easier for me. So that
Okay.
might be why we made the time. I don't remember,
Are
but
we
that's
doing it
how.
now or do we have other people in person? Are you?
Well, our intention is to keep doing it in person. Just tonight, there was crazy traffic
Oh,
around
I
the
see. Okay.
Birmingham area,
Okay.
and a lot of
7:30 is
people.
fine.
Yeah,
7:30.
but I hope, yeah, January, yeah, 2 weeks, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central. I'm
So
gonna
do you
stop the
want to do
recording.
6:30 at Hoover Library?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
our normal